SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
State Treasurer David McRae is returning record amounts of money to Mississippians, whether it's through the College and Career Savings Program or the hundreds of millions in unclaimed money awaiting your claim. Treasurer David McRae says get your applications and claims in today. Treasury.ms.gov.
It's time for True American Heroes. For the Record with Jack Rutland. Another exclusive on SuperTalk Mississippi 102.1 FM. Many of our heroes have taken their stories with them to the grave. But this show is about the stories and personal experiences of these veterans.
Today we're glad to have with us Mr. Roffie Burt, a Vietnam vet, as we continue our meetings and our time with these veterans, sharing their experiences of their time in serving our country. Mr. Burt, we're glad to have you with us this morning. I'd like to start by just asking you kind of a little bit about your background. Now, you are a Brookhaven boy.
Yes.
Born and raised in this area. I think you said you were born in Auburn.
That's right.
Down in the corner, that would be the southwest corner, just about, of Lincoln County.
That's right.
You were involved in the conflict in Vietnam, served your country, wore the uniform during that period. Let's kind of lead up to that. What caused you to become a part of the United States military?
Well, I was working in the engineering division with Mississippi Power and Light Company, and everybody had a 6-year obligation, and it kind of puts you on hold until you get that over with. So first signed up for OTS in the Air Force, and they wanted to put me in the weather, and I had my engineering degree, so I didn't feel like I wanted to do the weather, so I declined that offer.
Well, one thing I noticed in our earlier discussion, I noticed that you referred to the Selective Service Board.
Right.
Now, a lot of folks may not be familiar with the draft during that period. I had personal experience with it, and you mentioned it in yours. Tell everybody a little bit about what the Selective Service Board was and what it did and how it affected every young man. Well,
when you turn 18, you had to sign up, go register with the Selective Board, and of course I'm not sure how all the draft situation went, but it was just common to everybody 18 years old had to register with the board.
It wasn't an option; it was a mandatory. I remember that well.
Yeah.
Now, after you signed up. Now, you actually weren't drafted?
No, I enlisted.
You volunteered. You enlisted, and you finally enlisted in the Air Force.
Right.
Any reason why you chose the Air Force?
Well, they had some branches that didn't require good eyesight. I had poor eyesight, so I enlisted with the intent of going through OTS. And of course, I always wanted to be a pilot, but my eyes kept me out of that. So, and OTS closed out, so the Army offered me a direct commission as first lieutenant. They would need engineering officers in Vietnam real bad. So I wound up putting 10.5 months in the Air Force and then switching to the Army.
Okay, so now you had your training here in the States. Tell me just a brief synopsis of your training and what that was like.
Well, of course, we went through 6 weeks of Air Force basic training at Lackland. They transferred me to the Holloman Air Force Base, and I was working at the high-speed test track out there, and we had a 3-man engineering team doing design work. So they put me in with 2 GS-11s and doing engineering design on the high-speed test rails out there.
Now, what was a test rail?
Well, they had a 7-mile track out there that they tested all type of missiles and stuff on. In fact, they had sprinkler systems, for instance, along the track, and they'd run these nose cones of the missiles down to see what effect they'd have on these intercontinental missiles when they went through a rainstorm, for instance.
Really? Interesting. Well, I know you had your training, spent some time there, but you ended up in the Army, and then at some point you actually were shipped to Vietnam. Tell us a little bit about what happened and how that took place.
Well, when I commissioned first lieutenant, I went to Fort Belvoir for 8-week EOBC, and then they transferred me to Fort Leonard Wood as a troop project officer. under the post engineers, and I put in about 10 months there, and then I got my orders for Vietnam.
So you shipped out to Vietnam. Where did you make the trip, by aircraft or by ship?
Well, the battalion had just gone in, and of course they went by ship, but I was one of the first officers added to the battalion, and so I went into Oakland Army Base and then transferred to the Travis Air Force Base, and they flew us through Hawaii and the Philippines, and then into Cameron Bay, and then a small plane from there up to Queen Yan, An-Kay, and on into Pleiku, where I was stationed.
So when did you actually arrive in Vietnam? What year was that?
In May of '67.
May of 1967. Things were pretty hot going on during that time.
Yeah, that was during a big build-up.
In preparation for something we're going to talk about here in just a little bit, but give us an idea, first of all, what were your responsibilities when you reached your base, your assignment, which was Pleiku? Give us a little bit about what your assignment was, and then secondly, tell us a little bit about the life, because a lot of people, Vietnam's starting to get a little age on it, not referring to yourself or myself personally, but that was a lot of years ago, and a lot of folks are not aware of what it was really like. They may see the video, they may see things on TV, but really what was it like being in country, during that time? And give us a little bit about what you were actually doing, some of the things, briefly.
Well, when they sent me to the 937th Engineering Group and then to the B Company of the 815th Engineer Battalion, I was a platoon leader for 2 months. And the first job was to go out and check a DG pit for mines. They were putting opening up to, we used that for materials for building roads.
DG pit. And what's a DG pit?
Decomposed granite.
Okay.
And it's basically fill material, took the place of gravel here. And so that was the first assignment, and then immediately they put me on designing and building a 50 million barrel tank farm. They were having to pipe all the fuel from An-Kay into Pleiku, so they built this 50 million barrel tank farm at Pleiku, and then we built a pipeline, cut out all the hauling.
So Pleiku, was it actually in central Vietnam?
It's in the Central Highlands.
Central Highlands. It must have been a mighty, it sounds like it was a really large base.
Well, yes, it was. 4th Infantry Division was at Dragon Mountain, just right next to it. And it's over close to the Cambodian-Laos border, so there's a lot of activity going on in there.
And when you say activity, I think I know what kind of activity you're talking about. Well, interesting, really interesting. Now, you were at Pleiku, and how long did you actually stay at that location? Was that where you stayed through most of your time in Vietnam?
Well, we had all of the Pleiku Providence, all the way up to Doc To and down to Kontum that we worked, but our base stayed at Pleiku the entire 12 months.
So you were in country 12 months?
Right.
You were talking about disarming mines and things like that. What were some of the other responsibilities that you had at that point while you were in Pleiku?
Well, while I was platoon leader, the 2 months I was in B Company, I basically was tied up with a tank farm the most of the time. But when I got promoted to captain and went to the 3 section as a civil engineering battalion, civil engineer, then we had all the different projects. We built airports, heliports, a lot of roads, a lot of barracks, and just about all the projects.
What kind of living quarters did you have? You probably had 3 squares most of the time, and maybe even had Bob Hope or some of those guys for entertainment, because you were in a little bit more of a secure area than some other areas of Vietnam. But what was a normal day like?
Well, it started out, of course, one of the battalions there, and then when I got there during the company time, we were in tents. A little later on, they started building the wooden barracks for the enlisted men, and then before I got out, we actually had wooden BOQs built. Bachelor Officer Quarters. Right.
Good, okay.
And they switched from sandbags to, by the time I left, when we built the BOQs, we were actually putting in 2 plywood sheets about 3 feet apart and taking a dump truck or front end loader and dump sand in between them. So we finally got away from sandbags.
No air conditioning?
No, not hardly. Across the holler at the air base, they did have air conditioning.
They did, but not you guys. Well, tell me a little bit about, did you have much contact with the enemy? I'm sure you were constantly aware of things like snipers and possibility of enemy activity in your area. Did you have much contact with those sorts of things?
Only one time did I think about 18 sappers slipped in our perimeter and blew up a lot of equipment, and we wound up killing 10 of them. But we operated a rock quarry and crusher about 5 miles out of Pleiku, and of course it was a little bit isolated, and they were always, coming in and attacking, getting a lot of fire out of that.
What's a sapper?
Well, it's a destructive engineer.
They were there to create havoc.
Right.
Okay. Usually, were they VC or NAV?
Yeah, we had both. It started out VC, but later on it had a lot of NVA in there too.
Interesting. It had to be quite an adjustment for you. Of course, you had a little bit of time in the military, short time, but still had some in the States. But when you got to Vietnam, it had to be a little bit of I won't say culture shock, but there had to be some adjustment because all of a sudden you're in a foreign country and you're dealing with South Vietnamese Army personnel to some extent, I would suppose, that were allies. But what was it like for a young man from Lincoln County, Mississippi, all of a sudden to find himself in Vietnam? Any thoughts about or any memories that you have about that kind of adjustment?
Well, we didn't have any dealings with the South Vietnamese Army at all, being an engineering unit. But of course, we had some the quarries on the other side of Pleiku, so we wound up, driving across Pleiku a good bit and getting familiar with civilians. Here, a lot of people will put shorts on the kids and let them run around. Over there, they put a little shirt, but nothing on the bottom, which is kind of unusual. Of course, I found out the reason for that, too.
Yeah, okay. We're talking today with Mr. Roffie Burt, veteran of the Vietnam War, sharing some interesting experiences. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. We're sitting today with Mr. Roffie Burt, Lincoln County native, as he shares his experiences with us about his time in the Vietnam conflict. Mr. Roffie, again, I want to thank you for taking the time to come over and spend some time talking with us. Now, I do remember that you were in the middle of the Tet Offensive, which historians and some Vietnam vets will remember was a pretty difficult time for a lot of GIs. It was a pretty serious battle that went on, actually over a period of months, I think. And I think Pleiku was caught up in the middle of the Tet Offensive. Can you share a little bit about what was going on and what may have happened to your unit and to your base during that time?
Well, they actually captured a document just before the Tet Offensive, kind of alerted us to the fact that they were going to attack. And, of course, they actually wound up attacking a few hours earlier in Pleiku. And since we actually had a little alert, they kind of picked at me because I actually slept in full gear that night.
Good idea.
Even my flak jacket had it on, and I actually used my steel pot as my pillar, and I had my M16 stacked up by the door.
Good thinking.
And Captain Fox kind of laughs. He says when the first round came in, he rolled over, and before his feet hit the floor, he heard me pass the door. And he probably wasn't joking. I was ready for it.
Okay, so what did you guys end up having to do when that attack took place? Of course, you had a little bit of warning, but I mean, I'm sure everybody had certain assignments and responsibilities at that point. What do you remember about when the first shells started falling? What was your responsibility, your guys and your group?
Well, we just, of course, immediately we hit the bunker, which was not too far from us, and the next day they started reorganizing the engineers as infantry, which had us a little bit concerned. Of course, we basically, defended our own, what they call Engineer Hill, where we was located, but we never really went on any offensive type, and this was one thing that, it may have led to.
So this was NVA, the Tet Offensive, or was it a combination of both?
It's
both.
Combination.
And how long did the Tet Offensive last? I'm not sure I remember.
Well, there in Pleiku, they routed all of them out in a couple of days, but it drug on in other parts of the country quite a while.
And a lot of stories of heroism and things coming out of that. The Tet Offensive was a pretty significant event in Vietnam. Did you ever have contact with any of the enemy? Of course, being an engineer and having all those other responsibilities, you probably never would have been around any of the VC or anyone like that. Any captured?
Well, when they broke in the compound, they laid the ones that they killed out up at the dispensary, and I happened to be going by and saw some of them riddled with bullet holes, but I never actually, shot one.
Any of your engineering group, any casualties or injuries to any of the guys that you worked with in engineering?
Well, our battalion, we probably lost about a dozen the year I was there, and half of them was accidents, and some of them, of course, being young kids,
yeah.
They were stupid accidents. Like the first week I was there, a guy started wrapping up his wire around his Claymore mine and did not disconnect the generator, which was sitting on a 2x4 in the bunker, and blew him all to pieces. And later on, some of the guys started straightening out the pins on hand grenades, and they were each one issued 3 hand grenades, and they had them in a sandbag. And the guys coming off the bunker one morning, and one of the pins, pulled out and blew. All the hand grenades went off.
Goodness. So you did spend your entire tour at Pleiku.
Right.
Vietnam, if you go back and look at the news media reports during that time, it was on TV every night, and a lot of negative feelings from people in the United States. What was it like in Vietnam, hearing about that sort of thing going on? Was it something that was even discussed, the demonstrations, the stuff like that, how it affected the guys like yourself in uniform in country?
Well, it never affected us till we got back, because, of course, communication, we didn't have communication, we didn't have cell phones and stuff like that. In fact, we spent the full 12 months over without ever calling, having any contact other than writing letters. So we really didn't know what was going on until you come back, and then it was kind of sickening.
What was it like for you personally when you came back and began to, of course, being from the South, it's a little bit less likely to be an evident factor down here, but what was it like perhaps to you? What kind of feelings did it create after your service and risking your life, serving your country, obeying your country's call? What was it like?
Well, it's kind of disheartening. The media made up the Tet Offensive as being, a big flop, but the United States really won that decidedly. It was the media and the public that actually chalked it up as a victory for VC.
Interesting. Now, you came back after your 12 months in Vietnam. You came back to the States. Did you stay in the service much longer after that?
No, I had less than 90 days. They wouldn't reassign you if you had less than 90 days, so I had only about 60 days left, and so I just got my discharge.
Okay. And came back to Brookhaven, Mississippi.
That's right. I had written Mr. Roach, the high school principal, while I was in Vietnam. I was trying to decide what I was going to do when I got out, where I was going to go back in engineering. I thought I maybe like to teach math in school, and he encouraged me to teach at college instead of high school, which was the best advice I ever got. So I came back and got my master's and stayed on and taught 34 years at the state.
At Mississippi State University.
That's right.
Bulldog man. Well, I'm going to ask you an interesting question, not certainly to get any kind of spectacular response, but I think it's something I've heard so many vets say. If you were a young man today and the opportunity was there to serve your country again, even if it meant going to Vietnam again, would you do it all over?
Well, the military has totally changed now, so I don't really know how that worked. Back when I came through, you basically had a 6-year obligation. And now, with the volunteer army, you basically, it seems to me more like a job than, serving the country. So,
hard question to answer.
Hard question, right?
Compared to what it was like in that time. Good point. Well, let me just say this, Mr. Burt. I want to thank you so much for your spending this time with us, giving us an opportunity to visit and share your experiences. It's been a great honor for me. And I also want to just remind you that on behalf of our community, our state, and our country, we're grateful for your service to your country.
Well, thank you.
A SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
Toyota of Brookhaven has been voted best new car dealership in Southwest Mississippi 4 years in a row. Come see the difference. Exit 40 Brookhaven or online at ToyotaofBrookhaven.com. Great service, great savings. At Toyota of Brookhaven, we deliver.